The first time she kind of hears about the lobotomy and the stakes, she tries to escape, but then she winds up in the drum with the men, and it's almost like this implication that if she were to escape back out into the real world and survive, the threats would still be there because of the way society is set up and the way the culture is set up. So that's kind of dark.
Yeah, it's
a very dark movie, which is why when I was watching the movie, I was like, these stakes are high. Yeah. This is serious. Hello, welcome to Queer Cinema Catchup. I'm Joe.
And I'm Allison.
And today we have very special guests, Fish Jelly Film Reviews.
Hello. That's Nick.
And that's Joseph.
So we're all here to get, wait, how do I, okay, well we're all.
We're gonna say we're all here to gay.
We're all here to gay.
We're queering.
We are all here to gay, and we're also here to do what we usually do on this podcast, which is talk about movies, TV shows, and miscellaneous topics through a queer lens. And today's film is...
Suddenly Last Summer. Is it 1959 when it came out?
Yes.
And then Allison likes to do her little on the fly synopsis. But before we get into that, I'm really curious, Joseph and Nick, like what your connection is to Suddenly Last Summer?
Well, my connection to the film is through Nick. So go ahead.
Well, I did my undergrad English major on this film. It was supposed to be about mutations of the homoerotic and the female neurotic in the works of Tennessee Williams. Whoa. But then I honed it down to this film, which I felt was the most special to me. Because I remember ordering a VHS copy of it off eBay when I was a kid, and then Tennessee Williams kind of became this gateway drug to all of these things. But my initial fascination was probably with Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
I don't think I had seen an Elizabeth Taylor movie before I met Nick. My impression of her as an 80s baby was White Diamonds,
Michael Jackson's friend.
Michael Jackson's best friend, her in a wheelchair, kind of sickly. So when Nick introduced me to her earlier works, I was blown away.
I'm embarrassed. Well, not that embarrassed, but I've never seen A Streetcar Named Desire. I've never seen Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. I'm very unfamiliar with Tennessee Williams' work. Like, Something Last Summer was actually truly my first introduction into him. And
it's a good start.
After seeing this, I definitely want to watch more of his movies.
I was an English major as well, so I'm
sorry
to. We need to have a little nerd moment for a second, but can you say it was the?
I think I haven't read it in years, but it was Tin Roof Rusted, Mutations of the Homoerotic and the Female Neurotic in the works of Tennessee Williams.
That sounds really good.
I had a great time. It was a really great, speaking of summers, it was a great summer.
Suddenly Last Summer.
Yeah. Of note, Gore Vidal adapted the play for the film adaptation, and I have a quote tattooed on my chest, but it's actually Gore Vidal's translation of the material that I have on my chest.
Whoa, wait, what? Can you say what?
Yeah, it's in the shape of an upside down triangle, and maybe that's what hate is, not being able to use people.
Yes, I read the play last night, and I pulled that quote out. The quote in the play is, "We all use each other, and that's what we think of as love, and not being able to use each other is what's hate."
Yeah, and in the film, it's Liz Taylor saying, maybe that's what love is, using people, and then the second half. But behind the scenes that I also find very fascinating about, especially the three principal characters and their relationship to queer cinema or being queer or allies themselves, like it's very meta.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because Katharine Hepburn.
Well, purportedly her marriage to Spencer Tracy was a beard for both of them.
Okay, see, yeah, that makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then with Montgomery Clift too.
Oh yeah, he was gay and very troubled. He had various addictions. Liz was his good friend, and she in fact saved his life because he got in a terrible car accident. They were filming Raintree County, and I think he'd left a party drunk at her house, and she actually had to dig the teeth out of his mouth. He was choking on it. That's why he seemed so fragile in this film, and if you go back and watch Raintree County, there's a marked difference because filming was delayed. When he came back, he was very much changed. Mm-hmm. But it was because of her that he was able to continue to work in a lot of ways, because she would put up her salary to insure him, which I believe she did for this film.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I read after we finished the movie. Elizabeth Taylor was the reason he got the part in Suddenly Last Summer, but he was, especially after this accident, which I didn't, the way you described it, I had not read about it in great detail.
And that's what I've read. I mean, a lot of that is probably maybe exaggerated
but no,
over time.
I mean, it's got to be based on some kernel of truth. But yeah, I read that she got him the part. He was very reliant on drugs and alcohol at this time, and he really frustrated the director.
Mankiewicz, yeah.
Yeah, and then he wanted to get him fired from the production, and apparently led the Elizabeth Taylor and Katharine Hepburn to really dislike working with the director. And then apparently there's some rumor that at the end of Catherine's last scene, she said, "Am I done?" And then he said, yeah, you're done. And then she spat in his face.
Yes.
Oh,
yeah,
that's really what it was like. And then she got in her elevator and went upstairs.
Yeah, basically.
Well, I'll give a quick little synopsis based on my memory of watching this movie a couple days ago. It begins with a doctor who is a pioneer of the lobotomy procedure at a hospital in New Orleans that is in a poor financial situation. And there's an opportunity to get support from a rich woman who has the ability to donate a lot of money and perhaps put the hospital and the procedure on the map. But there's sort of a catch, which is that the woman in question, played by Katharine Hepburn, would really like this doctor to perform the procedure on her niece, who went on vacation the previous summer with Katharine Hepburn's son, who has now passed away and perhaps has broken from reality and is crazy, or maybe she just knows something she shouldn't. And that is my little setup for the film.
Oh, do you guys think is that pretty accurate to
Yeah.
the movie?
Yes.
For sure, yeah.
And the other woman, I should say, was played by Elizabeth Taylor.
Lizzie, yeah.
And then on your channel, have you done like an in-depth analysis of Southern last summer, or was that was the one
gosh.
you
No.
showed?
No, this would be the first time,
Cool.
but you reference it any chance you get.
Of course.
Well, it's exciting then.
Well, just to give like a brief, like some of the plot at the beginning of the movie, I think it's really interesting. We start out with Montgomery Clift, who's at Lions View, the mental institution, and he's getting ready to perform a lobotomy on a patient. You see like a railing like break off, and like Montgomery like looks behind him, and all of a sudden like the light starts like flickering a little bit, and then it finally shuts off. And I like didn't know what was going on. I was like, what is this horror movie? He's covered in a mask. I like didn't even know it was Montgomery Clift to begin with. And then I think at the end of the scene, he says to the men, like, I hope you never have to work in these kinds of conditions when you're performing such a delicate procedure operating on a brain. The quality of the institution isn't up there. They need money, they need funding. A huge chunk of this movie takes place in the jungle, quotation marks, which is Violet, her backyard, which Allison like read the entire play
It's all set
last
in the
night. It's
jungle.
all set in the jungle. And so her niece has kind of like lost her mind. She's suffering from like
Dementia precox.
Yes.
Yes.
Katharine Hepburn cracks me up so much because she like speaks through her teeth when she talks.
Oh, the voice work, trails of debris. Like, it's so good.
She's not really asking. She's kind of just like telling like, this is what I've decided that
Yeah.
my niece is gonna have a lobotomy. And then the doctor's like, do you understand that, yes, it pacifies them, but it also takes away their abilities in other capacities. And she's like, but how nice that would be, you know, to quiet the mind, to pacify them, to be at peace, to not have to look up at the sky. And what does she say? Like
See devouring birds.
The savage devouring birds. And then Montgomery Clift is like, now you said a sky full of savage devouring birds. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh yes, I can. And then that's where she launches into the story about they're in the Encantadas. Is that where it is?
Yeah.
Her son really wanted to see these sea turtles like lay the eggs of their children, and they came back and revisited when the turtles hatched. And the mothers aren't there to see this, but the children are hatching and they are like crawling out to the sea. And then all of a sudden all these birds come through. And they just come and they start, she said, savagely devouring these turtles from the sky. It's just like a horrific image.
But really, it's setting up for the metaphor for what happens to Sebastian
Yeah.
is these turtles, their biological process is to go be born in the sand and then be exposed, like their underbelly's exposed, they're vulnerable, and life is there to rip and rend them apart. And what's so scary to Violet, the mother, is like, this isn't God, this isn't what life is, because she believes that they're above all of this anyway. But really, this is what it is. It's about being exposed, it's about being seen, and his queerness is seen and exposed, and he is devoured for it.
Yeah.
When I first saw this, I knew that we were watching it because Sebastian is like a gay character, or it could be assumed that he's a gay character. So when I hear the story, I'm like, oh, like what a horrific thing is this going to be foreshadowing for? And we can talk about it as the movie went on. My view of Sebastian changed significantly.
Sure. Yes.
So I'd be curious to hear like what your thoughts of Sebastian were when you first saw it.
Well, Katharine tells Montgomery Clift, you remind me of my son.
And his name is Dr. Kukrowitz, means sugar.
Yes, that was in the play, but not in the film.
Personally, when people tell me I remind them of like their nephew or their son, I usually assume they're gay or biracial. It's one of the two. So I think immediately I thought, oh, he must be gay. And then she refers to it's a French word, garçonnier, which means like bachelor pad. But the way Katharine describes it is like a place where all the young men go to be private.
Yeah.
So immediately that clued me
I
into.
didn't even hear those lines.
Yeah, so immediately that clued me into like, oh, he's gay.
Well, and then we meet Catherine's mother and brother.
Yes.
He asked the mother if Sebastian loved Catherine.
And then the cousin laughs.
Yeah,
like he doesn't like girls.
And then Catherine's like, time for you to leave.
Yeah,
She needs her daiquiri.
Her daiquiri.
her 5 p.m.
Every
daiquiri.
5 p.m. And then there's a picture of a man that always intrigued me, like it's a man's face in the background, but it was giving me kind of Dorian Gray vibes.
Which is juxtaposed with that skeletal angel.
Yes,
Yes.
that really struck me, especially because
Yeah.
I just didn't react to it, and it's so disturbing.
Well, and we revisit that figure
in the end, when she's
yeah.
recounting in flashback, because it's all flashback, even because it's set in 1938, because the poem of Summer that didn't get written was 37. And Tennessee Williams' own sister, I believe, underwent a lobotomy.
Yes.
So I think Kukrowitz is a version of Tennessee Williams, and the kind of trifecta of Montgomery Clift. It's all very gay, and there's a lot of predatory undertones that. Again, to continue with that question, like the evolution of our thoughts on Sebastian changed. Like, I'm unclear about how conscious they were of how problematic he is as a person.
Yeah, because I end the movie believing Sebastian was vile.
Yeah.
And it feels very timely to me. He reminds me of like your standard pretentious gay man
Yeah.
in 2024. And the way Elizabeth Taylor's character is describing how he would categorize people, particularly when she says he's moving away from brown-skinned people to blondes. Yeah, my impression of him changed a lot during the course of the film.
And Kathy's painted as, just very unwell. She has what's the dementia called again?
Dementia
precox.
But even in 30s terms, Monty Clift is saying that doesn't mean anything.
Yeah. But I'm sure Catherine just like waved it off.
She's insane.
She's insane. She's lost her mind. So we go to like St. Mary's, and it's like built up that Kathy's just like lost her mind.
She's an erotomaniac,
Yeah.
I think they even say. Yeah.
And then Monty and her like interact, and she does seem pretty stable, if not shaken up, because she's been locked away. And then she says something along the lines like, "Don't be alarmed, but I'm going to attack you." And then Monty's like, "What?" She's like, "For those cigarettes." She grabs the cigarette.
Well, and the relationship she has with him seems similar to what she would have had with Sebastian, which seems very much like a gay man and his best female friend.
Yeah.
So that's interesting too, because I when I watched this movie, I didn't really tie Monty's character to being gay also. Now that you mention it, she feels this immediate comfort with him because she knows him without knowing him. Is that what you'd say?
Well, specifically, Katharine Hepburn's character is saying that you remind me of my son, and the fact that Elizabeth Taylor's character immediately gloms on to Montgomery Clift, I got the sense that Montgomery had the same essence as Sebastian. Also, he seems quite frail, not just because it's like post-accident Montgomery Clift, but the character seems vulnerable and exposed in a way. And he seems exposed because I assume that he might also.
Well, the women then are kind of like the savage devouring birds.
Yeah.
Are picking at his vulnerability.
When the doctor in Montgomery Clift brings Elizabeth Taylor over, he doesn't want to put her in like a normal patient's room. So he has her set up in the nurse's ward. He lets her get her hair done, wear street clothes. She looks fabulous.
When she's first introduced in this movie, she's like in a dress, she like looks fine. But then she says to Montgomery Clift's character, like, can I, do my dress and get my hair? I can be more attractive.
Right.
She shows up in the next scene. How is this even possible to look even more incredible than you did at the beginning of the movie? And then her performance is just amazing too, like just so well-rounded. And two, to be like holding her own against Katharine Hepburn, Montgomery Clift, like it's just, it was incredible.
They were actually up against each other at the Oscars that year for Best Actress.
Whoa.
Both of them lost. But notably, she was kind of being punished by the Academy because at the time, it was a huge scandal that she was having an affair with Debbie Reynolds' husband, father of Carrie Fisher, Eddie Fisher. And that was a big tabloid scandal. And in fact, Eddie Fisher is credited as one of the street urchins.
Really?
Yeah.
There's a really interesting scene where she becomes agitated and walks. This is after her mother and brother come to visit her.
Yes.
There's like a walkway that overlooks a bunch of male patients.
The drum, they call it.
And they all become agitated. When you look back at that scene and then realize what she meant by procuring for Sebastian, how the men are drawn to her and the frenzy that it creates.
Yes.
And before that too, the mother and son basically come to Kathy and be like, "Look, you need to have this lobotomy so we can get money from Violet. There's no other way around it." So she's like terrified, and that's where she like
Well,
watches
it's the
this.
first time she's heard of this.
So it's the first time she's heard of it.
When we were watching the movie, Joe just looks over and he goes, this movie, the stakes are so high. Her brain might be at stake here. And you were like very alarmed.
Yeah.
Even Monty's boss, played by Albert Decker, who's very stiff, I think. He's like, when do you want the operating table tomorrow? Because this is happening.
Yeah, it's like, oh my gosh. And it does make us like think about how it was an awful procedure, but also who it was used on. Like women who were too outspoken or hysterical. I saw some information too that it was often used to try and cure homosexuality as well.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just really interesting that that's a component. And then to know that it's in Tennessee Williams' personal background. His sister Rose had childhood schizophrenia, and then they performed a lobotomy on her and she was institutionalized, and he used the royalties from his more successful plays to take care of her for the rest of her life.
And you can see hints of his sister in Glass Menagerie too.
Yeah, that's the one I've read prior to this.
Well, I don't know. Streetcar's pretty big too. But yeah, I mean, he's got a lot of really good plays.
And when that scene happened on the drum, it was very scary. They were like grabbing for her, trying to pull her down. There's this kind of information that you get where prior to that happening, there was a bad sexual encounter, possibly like a sexual assault. It's kind of ambiguous.
The dueling oaks.
Yeah. In the play, I found out Sebastian really liked Katharine and wanted her to be her friend, and he kind of pressured his mother into letting her have a coming out in society. And so she was kind of invited to all these balls and things like that, and she was semi-successful until this happened, and then she caused a big scene, and then people wouldn't talk to her anymore, and she was very depressed. And that's when Sebastian was like, you need to come with me to Europe. And so there's a sense that he's like taking care of her in a way, but also using her. And that kind of goes back to the love quote.
Yeah.
And then it's interesting too, because like previously with Montgomery in that room, I think she's trying to recount the story of what happened with Sebastian, but her mind seems to be blocked. This event happens with all these men grabbing at her. She's terrified, she's screaming. And I wonder if that's in some way kind of like reactivates that part of her mind that she forgot about.
Yeah.
She's triggered, she remembers it. And that ultimately leads to the final scene where she goes and tells everything in the jungle.
The death of Sebastian. I guess we haven't really said what happened.
Should we reenact it like they did in the movie?
Oh my God.
You be Elizabeth Taylor, we'll be the rest of the cast.
All right, fine.
We need the swell of that score.
The percussions.
The cymbals.
Let's quickly make our handmade instruments. But yeah, basically these...
We're laughing, but it's
very
actually
disturbing.
horrifying. And disturbing.
And it's almost like it feels mythological, but like these young boys approach them while they're at a restaurant, but there's like a fence separating them, and they start to harass them for bread. And then Sebastian says something like, I can't go back inside the restaurant because they said things about me to the waitstaff.
Vile things about me.
Yeah, so he doesn't want to be seen. Elizabeth Taylor wants them to go down to the beach to get like a water taxi. And he says no, and he runs up the hill, and all of these instrument-playing young men are chasing him up the hill, and then they surround him and kill and possibly eat him.
Yeah, he's cannibalized, according to her, yeah.
The location...
Cabeza de Lobo?
Yeah, I love how she says Cabeza de Lobo.
Wolf's Head. Lion's View, Wolf's Head.
The procurement part is that before they get to the restaurant, what Sebastian is doing is using his attractive cousin to lure men towards him.
Exactly.
So very predatory, but...
Well, you have to think the context about how did gay people meet, especially that when not allowed to be themselves or in marriages of convenience, and it was like that.
But even what's more creepy is we realize that Sebastian's mother, Katharine Hepburn, was doing that for him before Elizabeth Taylor was.
But clearly overlooking.
Well, and the play shed some more light on this, where Katharine Hepburn supposedly wasn't aware of what she was doing, and they were also doing it in refined places. The play seemed to imply that Sebastian was also getting older and maybe no longer could have success in those areas, and so that's why they made that big deal in the movie about going to the public beach, and Katharine Hepburn's like, my son would never go to a public beach, but it's because it kind of had to become this like baser
he was losing his
experience.
looks. Yeah. Even in the film version, she says things that are like, oh, he didn't like anybody that had, she doesn't use this language, but ulterior motives for him, because she said, in her words, he's chaste, and then he becomes literally chaste, C-H-A-S-E-D. At the end. To me, that says that they had conversations about people that desired him, but he had to play it off to his mother in a way that's like, oh, I'm not into that.
Yes.
That, like, I think all that energy is there. It's just you have to, some of it's very subtle. And Hepburn tried to distance herself from the material as well, because she thought it was sleazy and distasteful, and she feigned not really knowing what the subtexts were about. But apparently she mothered Monty Clift, and he was supposed to be in Sunset Boulevard, but he turned down the William Holden part because he thought there were going to be too many parallels drawn to his own life of his relationships with older women that was not sexual. So, and what a Dueling Oaks is a very phallic symbolism for what's going on at those deb balls.
What are the dueling oaks? What is that?
That's like where the incident happened where it seems like she probably was raped by a married man.
She clearly has had a horrible, devastating thing happen to her. She gets invited for what she thinks is a vacation with her cousin. Only
she's kind of in love with, it seems.
Yeah.
At least in the play.
The first flashback that we cut to is when she's describing how Sebastian dressed her. And we talk about like the Hays Code. It's like things you can show on the screen, what you can't show. And we cut our first flashback image is Elizabeth Taylor like in the water. That swimsuit is like so tight on her.
See-through.
See-through. And it was just like shocking to that's the first image we cut to.
And then she's protesting. She's
protesting. She doesn't want to go out there. She's like getting dragged by her cousin. It's just like this horrific image. And two, like to add this on with like the whole dueling oak story too, it's like this, it's just like happening to her all over again.
Well, that's interesting because the image of Elizabeth Taylor in the white bathing suit on the beach with her hair down is a very famous, almost like a pinup type,
like glamorous
shot. But in the context of the film, it's a pretty traumatic ending to.
Well, think about
an ending to a traumatic scenario.
We then see her collapse on the beach on her knees, and she takes her beautiful hair out, and then we get a man whose crotch is right in her face, like she's positioned to fillet him.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that.
It's very sexual.
And I guess too, you made me just think about how the first time she kind of hears about the lobotomy and the stakes, she tries to escape, but then she winds up in the drum with the men, and it's almost like this implication that if she were to escape back out into the real world and survive, the threats would still be there because of the way
our
society is set up and the way the culture is set up. So it's kind of dark.
Yeah, it's
a very dark movie, which is why when I was watching the movie, I was like, these stakes are high.
Yeah.
This is serious.
Joseph and I saw The Celluloid Closet the other week. In that documentary, there is a scene from Suddenly Last Summer, and Catherine Elizabeth Taylor's character is sort of getting into an argument with Violet at the mental institution.
Where they're in the sunroom?
Oh yeah, they're in the sunroom, and then the doctor's there, and it's kind of the big reveal moment where we find out that while on vacation with Sebastian, Catherine has been, I think the word she uses is his procurer, and kind of being on the beach to attract the attention of
young men.
Mm-hmm. And she's also saying that Violet had done this too until she was too old. And so we kind of saw this scene, and I didn't know anything about the movie. So I kind of entered the movie
through this,
knowing that kind of reveal. And so I'm so curious what I would have thought, like without having that knowledge.
I feel like it's pretty obvious right away that her son was gay.
And to gay people watching it then,
sure,
it would be as well. But yeah, like what are the heterosexuals thinking when they're confronted with this? Like, procure what for him? Like, but again, this is 1959. This is before homosexuality can even be said on screen. That would be in 1961 as part of the production code. So we had to like talk around all of these things. So all of these 50s adaptations of Tennessee Williams, whose plays were usually more specific with what they were talking about, were all kind of butchered and codified and in strange ways. And again, that's why you couldn't have a film like this made now, because we wouldn't talk that way, even in retrospect.
It's amazing that it got made in 1959. And I mean, reading the play, you said that like the themes are a lot more, and like explicit. You were saying explicit and specific. And so the fact that it even got adapted into a movie is
what were they?
Really surprising.
They're literally playing with fire.
Yeah.
Because just because you're not saying he's gay or homosexual, there's no getting around the fact of the matter that this is happening. And Vito Russo, who wrote The Celluloid Closet, which is a very important piece of first wave queer theory, and kind of a Bible that we can go back to for all this documentation. I think that he was from a generation that was too close to this film, and kind of the disparagement of that representation still stung. And what I thought I was doing with my thesis was this is really worthy of recuperation, because we have to keep in mind this context of which these queer creatives were writing under. This was the only way that this could be presented.
Yeah, that's something I was thinking about, because when I saw that scene out of context in the documentary, I was sort of like, wow, the negative power of representation, or like the messages that can be transmitted via the screen. And I also, as a side note, found out that the only reason they were able to subvert like the Hays Code with this film is because of the gruesome ending and kind of the punishment that comes. Yeah. But then when I was looking more into the creation of the film and knowing like Tennessee Williams, Clift Montgomery, and Gore Vidal are all queer as well. So what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. It's like, well, we want to tell a story about queerness, but the only way we can do it is to kind of use this negative brush. And yet maybe the negative brush is more about the predatory nature of what Sebastian was doing and not really about his identity from the creator's perspective. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think we can't get away that there is predatory behavior in the community. The kind of character they're painting is, we've seen this person, even though he's invisible in the film. And What I don't like about the documentary Celluloid Closet is they collapse it with Frankenstein, the monster being chased. And what I wrote about was that, to me, Sebastian Venable, who we never see, only from behind, we never see his face, to me, he's presented in Hollywood cinematic terms like Jesus Christ, who also we weren't allowed to see because it was blasphemous to see Christ on screen. And going back to that line about what love and hate is and how you can use people or to be used or not used, and he's literally devoured by people that can't use him.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think there are all those themes that can be teased, whether they were intentional or not.
Well, that is interesting because Jesus eating the body and blood of Christ.
Because I remember showing this to my friends in high school, and they're like, these creepy old ladies. I had a running joke with some girls about the Encantados. And,
That's begging you to make a joke.
But you watch that and you're like, this is bizarre.
After Katharine Hepburn's character finds out her son was killed, she has a hysterical stroke.
It wasn't a stroke, she keeps saying.
But then in the end, when all is revealed, clearly Katharine Hepburn has a nervous breakdown.
I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
Because I imagine that in the end, Katharine Hepburn's character ends up in a facility.
I would assume.
In contrast to her niece.
I think that's why her assistant is very upset at the end. Fox Hill,
Yeah. In the end, the whole story is revealed, and she's faced with this, and she kind of like loses her mind away. Much like the character in Sunset Boulevard believes that she's going to be on the big picture. She doesn't realize the consequences of what's happening. She now believes that the doctor is Sebastian. She's like, oh, get some rest. And she like goes up to her little elevator, is going up. I'm going to go talk to the captain now to redirect her course. Like, she's lost it.
It was sad. It made me feel sad.
Yeah. I'd be curious. I don't know if you have seen like the movie I Saw the TV Glow, where it's like also deals with like memory loss. You would use that as an example of something that like absorbed me, where like I was very concerned. I felt like I was like in this very dark place, and where the idea of memory loss felt much more like real and palpable in that movie. Whereas like in Something Last Summer, like I got the intention of it, but I didn't. I don't know. Like it still felt like performative in a way. When Catherine's like, "Oh, it's you, Sebastian," and it's like, it doesn't. Is that how it works?
Yeah. Do you mean in the sense that when she loses her mind and how that's exhibited as itself as a performance, like she still had to retreat in the past to not acknowledge her son was gay? I think is what she was trying to do. Whether I believe that was a psychic break, I don't know.
Well, my recollection of that film was it felt like we were witnessing someone's like very personal trauma, which I think in 2024 we're allowed to do. So there's a stark difference between what a film like Suddenly Last Summer could do.
Yeah.
And maybe that's why it feels more performative, because it was limited. It had to be coded.
Well, that film is a lot more getting into like psychological finesses of compartmentalization than something like Suddenly Last Summer, which is based on a play, feels much more theatrical.
Is the intention though that these characters are facing compartmentalization? That word you said. Because my understanding is that they do literally, like when Elizabeth Taylor like can't remember what happened to Sebastian, like I interpret it as like she literally can't remember.
I thought of it a few ways. Like I think there were moments where we were supposed to believe that she couldn't access those memories or had like a mental block because she'd been trying to tell the truth and no one had been listening and this was the only way forward, and how conscious she was of that, I don't know. But I think that was added in because in the play, there is no question that she remembers. I think, actually I have a quote that I think is pretty applies. I didn't invent it. I know it's a hideous story, but it's a true story of our time and the world we live in. And then later on she says, I can't change truth. I'm not God. I'm not even sure that he could. I don't think God can change truth. How can I change the story of what happened to her son in Cabeza de Lobo? So she's much more...
It's much more explicit.
Yeah, and it's kind of this idea like this is fact. And I know what the truth is. Whether or not I should share it is a different story.
Well, the mechanism that frees her is this truth serum. And she even has a line like, I can't stop now, like it's all gonna come out, like it's mental vomit that's coming out, but it's almost like a placebo, like we have given you like this physical freedom to release. We needed to stage it for it to come out, whereas, I don't know, life has changed a lot. Something, and like the trans experiences that we're talking about in something like I Saw the TV Glow, which is also dealing with the past where the language, the possibilities for the existence you want weren't allowed, which actually is a really interesting, you could probably have a thesis.
Joe?
Let's
get started.
Don't put that on me.
Get that laptop open.
But no, it's another point that I think is tangentially related to that is, Tennessee Williams, when he fell out of favor, when gay rights started being a thing, he was criticized for never speaking openly about his sexuality, but he wasn't able to do so. And I think each new generation kind of speaks to our forefathers and mothers of what they didn't do. Like there were protests at a screening of Boys Don't Cry, Hilary Swank, as a cis woman. It's like, well, that was what was available to be seen.
Yeah.
And it's all related to the position and the power hierarchy that we all had. And the context has to be kept in mind. But I think it's natural to want to do that because we do that to people now.
Yeah, I think it is natural to look back and object to what wasn't done or what could have been done. But of course, the ability to speak to that comes from what the past was able to do, kind of standing on the shoulders of the brave efforts within the context of that time.
It helps. Tennessee Williams, all of that helped move the dial forward. But looking back, all of it does seem a bit archaic. But
I'm curious what you thought about the scene in Suddenly Last Summer after the doctor Montgomery Clift gives Elizabeth Taylor the truth serum and she starts kissing him.
That's where I am confused then, saying that she realizes that he might be gay.
I mean, I feel like that's a common thing. A lot of women fall in love with gay men. It doesn't take much.
Yeah.
It didn't seem like a friendly kiss to me. It felt very romantic.
Right.
Well, it takes away responsibility.
Yes.
Like when you're like, I did that because I was drunk.
Yeah.
It's like, you gave me the serum to tell the truth and I have these feelings. So
I want to kiss you, so I'm going to kiss you.
Yeah, I assumed it was a sedative that lowered her inhibitions, made her open to suggestions. I mean, we know a few people who like to drink and then they will use that as like, oh, now you're...
Like, I can't help it.
You know how I get.
Yeah, you know how I get. I'm going to start grabbing on you. And it's like,
how about you stop it?
How about we?
We won't have that. But that also reminded me, like when you're young and maybe somebody gives you something and you're not sure if you're feeling something, so you're acting like...
Yeah, you're like, oh, they're looking at me. I'm going to...
I have to perform.
Yeah.
I had 3-0 duels. I'm like...
Yeah, I'm messed up.
I'm messed up.
I did think it was interesting in the final monologue and the flashback component, we do not see anyone else's reaction really to what's going on until the very, very end. And then we realize that Katharine Hepburn's had a break with reality, or is at least pretending to have had a break with reality.
Well, the other people who are present don't matter.
No.
Her mother, her brother, they haven't helped her. So it makes sense that we wouldn't care about their reactions.
But I love that scene so much. The swells of the music and Taylor's acting.
It's alarming.
It's alarming.
Instrumentation is just so unsettling.
It's almost orgiastic. It's like a deathgasm when she finally screams for help.
Yes.
I wanted to. I'm glad you commented on that.
I think so.
This is before the Scream Queen era. She has an incredible scream.
She has a great scream.
She does it the first time when the men are grabbing at her in the mental institution. And then it's always told through Elizabeth Taylor's story, so you don't hear the sound effects aside from the music playing. And so you never cut to like the audio of the past until it cuts to that scream of hers. And when she screams, like you feel it. Like I'm getting chills right now just thinking about it.
Have you seen Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?
I have not actually.
If you like a shrill Elizabeth Taylor and a lot of shade being thrown, that's like the perfect movie.
Yes. What she won her second Oscar for. Oh, so notably, she lost the Oscar for this year to Simone Signoret for Room at the Top. Again, tabloid fodder, she was being punished. And then she would win Best Actress the following year for Butterfield 8, which is based on a John O'Hara novel. But it's not a very well-loved film, and everybody kind of acknowledges it was kind of to make up for her not getting it the year before.
Wow, that's really interesting.
I do want to go back to, I remember when the credits of this movie started and it said it was like written by, and then Gore Vidal and Tennessee Williams popped up. I was really curious what their connection was, like how well did they know each other? And there was like this one like biography book I was reading about Tennessee Williams' life, and it seemed like at times like Gore and Tennessee were in the same room writing together.
Oh.
And Gore was much more cynical on life, and he had much more like a biting and like dark humor to him. Whereas like Tennessee Williams pulled a lot of the stories from his personal life, and everything was very like emotional and deep for him. And so I think there was like a little bit of a clash. In terms of their working relationship with each other, I think it kind of made for a really interesting experience for Suddenly Last Summer, just to kind of like bring in more of that cynicism and that bite to it too. And I feel like Katharine Hepburn especially really like got the humor. One of my favorite lines in the movie is Katharine in the jungle when she first meets the doctor. She's like, "Oh, you're from New Orleans?" And he's like, "No, Chicago." She's like, "Chicago." There's two places I've always wanted to go to: Hong Kong and Chicago. It's like those two places are wildly different.
I wrote that down.
Chicago is especially much like you can go there anytime.
Yeah, like
you're rich. What's stopping you?
Take a train there right now.
Yeah,
bro.
so I'd be curious if that line was in the play, but it seems like
it wasn't.
If there was like one line that I think Gore Vidal wrote, like I was like confident he wrote that line. It's just so hilarious, and the delivery is just brilliant. But yeah, it's just the personal connection Tennessee Williams has to his sister Rose, and how she had a lobotomy in real life in this movie, like faces lobotomy. And we've hinted to some of the dark past of what happens to Sebastian and why he is eaten alive by these children. And in this book, there was like a really revealing story where Tennessee Williams' grandfather was an Episcopalian reverend. And in his 80s, two strangers come to the reverend's house, and the reverend turns over all this money, and he immediately goes upstairs to his attic and grabs 30 to 40 years of sermons that he's like saved over time, and he takes them out to the backyard and burns them. And the implication was that the two men that came to the door were blackmailing him because he had been having a relationship with like underage boys, and they were gonna release that information. So talk about like a personal connection. Like I read that, I was like in shock. And then apparently if Tennessee Williams was by the Reverend's side as he was dying, and the Reverend's last words were, "Take me to Key West," which is a place that Tennessee Williams had a home there and they often visited. Dakin is like speaking to the press about this, about this story, the younger brother. And the press is kind of confused. He's like, well, Key West is like a very like gay area. And then he says, also as a reverend, you'd think he'd want to go to heaven. But maybe, but then also maybe for the reverend, Key West was heaven.
Yeah.
Tennessee Williams, like how much he pulls from his past and how much just like traumatic things happened to him. Like his like upbringing, he had a very like drunken and abusive father who also traveled a lot. He was a shoe salesman, like wasn't home a lot. I think his mother, Edwina, like relied a lot on her children like emotionally and put a lot of pressure on that. And I think Kathy's mother, I'm sure that Tennessee baked a lot of his own mom into that character because like even the way she like speaks, like she just, I was a little annoyed by her. Every time she talked, I was like, oh, I'm annoyed.
It's so effective, yeah. Well, I think The Mother in Glass Menagerie too is very much based on.
And that actor is
Mercedes,
the voice of
the demon in The Exorcist.
Yeah.
She has
The
a
mom?
great voice. Yeah, Mercedes McCambridge.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
She's fantastic opposite Joan Crawford in the film Johnny Guitar, and they hated each other. And
which is also featured in The Celluloid Closet.
it is. Joan Crawford was getting older and she's jealous, so one day she took all of Mercedes' wardrobe and threw it out on the road where they were filming.
That lady was,
Hateful lady.
she was bad.
It seems like a terrible time to experience, but what amazing stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting
Revelation about the reverend that I dropped on you.
Yeah.
And also the Key West component, if they were going there together, it's almost like Tennessee was obviously younger, so he was kind of in the role maybe of the procurer, because if he was youthful,
Yeah.
you know, like that's something I
interesting.
never
Yeah.
would have thought of. And then it also kind of brings up a point we've kind of like alluded to, but what's most disturbing to me about what's happening in Cabeza de Lobo is that it's not just that he's procuring men, but young boys.
Oh, sure,
that's
yeah.
She has a line, she's like, I recognize them from young boys to teenagers
Yeah,
or something like that.
The
Like,
line was like those that were between boyhood and young adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of like, oh.
But yeah, it ties back to like the question that I asked earlier, like what your view of was Sebastian at the beginning of the movie, where it was at the end. And so I just was like so shocked. Like as this was like slowly being revealed, I knew as like Elizabeth Taylor was having a hard time like recounting the story, I was like, okay, maybe his comeuppance, there was some accountability there.
Well, upon a rewatch, I wrote down like how fabulous it would be as a gay boy to have like an eccentric, rich, fabulous mother. But then as we get to learn more about him and
Yeah.
probably his lack of responsibility, his access to resources, the kind of monster
she created a monster.
was created.
Yeah, and a silly example of that, he was a poet and he wrote one poem a year.
Every summer.
After the movie was over, she was like, what did you do for work? And Alice was like, you didn't hear? All he did was write one poem a year.
He was a poet. And he ate salads and pills.
Yeah.
But he's also kind of like disappearing into the whiteness, like he's being devoured by himself. Like the monologue in the end is like the white, 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 and the sky was like a big white bone of a burned animal in the sky.
And it was tactile. You know, you could kind
Yeah.
of feel the burning white.
You can hear the percussions. I was confused by the dialogue. Elizabeth Taylor would be like, and there were percussions, you know, and then Montgomery would be like, yes, like drums. And it's like, okay, we don't need those
Like horns.
descriptions.
It made me think about, this is Joe, he was like, what are you talking about? But the Pied Piper,
Yeah.
the rat catcher would come to town and then they wouldn't pay him. And so, I don't know, he'd catch rats with music and then he lured all the children out of the city.
Yeah, I think that's all very much on purpose.
I think so. And I think like, yeah, it kind of makes it feel mythological.
I did want to say some like surprising trivia and behind the scenes. We talked about like the censorship and the script changes that happened. Gore Vidal was adapting this. And then we also talked about too, I mean, we've talked about all these things.
I'm proud of us.
Montgomery Clift's health issues. He dealt with the aftermath of a 1956 car accident and it also affected his like physical appearance. I haven't like seen any movies previously before this with him in it.
He looks altered.
I recommend The Heiress with Olivia de Havilland.
to see a real contrast.
Crime. You can see in this, Suddenly Last Summer, he has a huge scar like on his neck.
From that. So in addition to that, it seems like he was dealing with substance abuse. What that was specifically, I don't have that information.
Alcohol.
But then his health issues were like compounding, and it led to his death in 1966 at the age of 45, like such a young age. Like he died not long after this movie. And then I guess the last like trivia piece, Katharine Hepburn's strong opinions. Hepburn had significant input on her role and the film's direction, often clashing with the production team. Specifically, disagreements between the director, who found Hepburn too emotionally extreme at times. Her method acting at times clashed with Elizabeth Taylor's more glamorous approach to acting.
Oh, yes.
I talked about how like Katharine Hepburn, when she acts, she speaks through her teeth. There was almost something about her intonation that reminded me of the way Anthony Hopkins performed in Silence of the Lambs.
We both independently, like while Catherine was telling the story of the turtles and the savage devouring birds, I was thinking of the story about the lambs being led to slaughter. And then we paused the movie, and Joe went upstairs, and then he came back down, and he's like, I was just thinking. I kind of think how Katharine Hepburn's monologue reminded me of Silence of the Lambs. So I do think there's something to it.
I think Hopkins said that he based the character on Hepburn and Hal, the computer from 2001.
Whoa!
I think he...
Unexpected.
I think that's true. He said that, but yeah.
Hey, so you were onto something.
Yeah.
The way she was like recounting this haunting story, it reminds me of like when Clarice is recounting this haunting story of the lambs, like this revelation.
And using animals as a metaphor for human behavior.
And then it's interesting too, because like Hannibal Lecter is a doctor, Montgomery Clift is the doctor in that movie, but then the twist of Silence of the Lambs is like, well, the doctor's also a cannibal.
Yeah, the doctor's evil. Yeah, and
there's a
Cannibalism in this.
Yeah.
I do think, I saw the TV Glow earlier, but I feel like
we should have
Silence of the Lambs.
That could be your next thesis.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah. I'm talking about,
You got two theses to
there's so much content to write about.
But I love it. It's a film I could watch anytime.
I didn't know what to expect, to be honest. I think I expected like great performances, but I didn't really know if the tone would be like dark or just campy, or I had no idea. And I came away being like, this was psychologically rich.
Yeah.
And I will not stop thinking about it. So I'm really glad we decided to watch it.
Same.
You don't normally give films scores. No.
No, we don't.
No, but we will.
Oh, I was like, I thought you were talking about the film score. I was like,
No,
the music.
no.
What about the music?
I love the score.
on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being masterpiece, what would you give?
I'm gonna go for 5. I feel like it's a masterpiece.
I'm gonna go with a 4. I don't know, just maybe it's in comparison to the play. I think after I read the play, I was like, that is a 5 for me. I'm gonna give the movie a 4.
And I have no frame of reference, so it's a classic for me. What about you two?
I would give it a 5 based on several factors, like the cultural implication, the cast, and the story.
Yeah.
I would give it a 5 as well. I think I have a very close personal connection with it, maybe, but every time I've seen it, as you were speaking about getting chills, like Elizabeth Taylor gives me chills in the movie, and not even just in the final scene. And I find it just really poignant and moving about where we've come from and where we're going culturally as queer people. And I don't know, I just find it rich, I think is the best word.
That's really a beautiful way to put it, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like today we dived into a lot, but I feel like you could speak on this for hours. There's still like so much of it that we haven't covered yet.
Wait, I'm gonna change mine to a 5. I can't be the only one.
I liked your reasoning though that you found the play so powerful.
Play can have a 6, all right?
Okay. You don't want the savage devouring birds to come after you.
No, I do not. I want to be one of those turtles that makes it into the ocean.
Yeah.
Well, Nick and Joseph, thank you so much for coming on.
It's really fun.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Queer Cinema Catchup is a podcast where we talk about film, TV, and miscellaneous topics through a queer lens. I'm Joe.
I'm Allison.
Like, subscribe, comment, listen to both our platforms. Do you want to plug what's Fish Jellies?
We're on YouTube, podcast, Spotify, all that. We have a Patreon.
And at a certain level,
if you give us enough money, we'll watch whatever you want. I'll do a lot of things for the right amount.
well, how would you feel if someone constantly every week was like Southern Last Summer? Can you please review Southern Last Summer again?
I would refer you to the previous review.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Something else.
Yeah,
Pick something else, please.
All right, let's wrap this up. Goodbye.